Hi, hello community, PLAYERIGN'S here. Today I just got back from China and I just want to go over a little bit about what happened. Flying from Hawaii to China, you sort of have to stop at either Korea or Taiwan or Japan. And of course we chose Japan and it was actually a pretty good choice. For one, there's a hotel that actually connects to the airport that you can actually stay inside. We had some noodles, we had some takoyakis, and we sort of also lucked out because when the flight was departing, the captain actually took us around Mount Fuji. So we actually got a really good view, which was really nice. When we first arrived, the first thing I did was visited a small business. Because one of my hobbies when traveling is I really want to visit the local businesses and not really visit like of course, the tourist trap areas, the touristy areas, because that's really the Disneyland view of the place. I really want to get into nitty gritties of the culture. So of course we went to this really small noodle shop and it was about $1.30 and for this bowl of noodle. And of course I had a WeChat setup and a phone number setup. Essentially this is sort of like the god tier app of China, where once you have this downloaded and set up, you don't really have to do anything else because it acts sort of like a payment system, it acts sort of like a QR scanner, it acts as a messenger app, it acts as a map app, it acts as a train app, it acts as a hotel booking app, it acts as a hospital app, it acts as a Uber app, so on and so forth. Like it does a ton of stuff. Basically it's sort of like a tailored app store. But the reason why we can't really have it in the United States, and of course there's news about how Elon Musk wants to change X into that as well, is because Apple and Google is sort of gatekeeping that from happening. Because the WeChat app, is a super app, is essentially an app store, and they don't want any competitors, which is why we really haven't gotten a super app like WeChat in the West yet. Now, when I was at the airport, I did get in contact with this American lawyer, and he did go through a little bit about how I should go about copyright laws, the contracts that we should sign with the developers, as well as trademarking. But I did think about it, and I think I'm going to do that a lot later. When I actually start releasing the game, and not really when I'm so early in development. Now, the main reason I went to China was to meet some of my old PUBG friends who I met online. But first, before that, which we were going to meet in Shenzhen, which is like the tech city, but we did visit rural China first. And this is when IShowSpeed was actually in Changsha, and I was sort of in the same area as well. But when IShowSpeed was in like the actual city, I was in the mountains in a Buddhist temple. It has this really nice like interior cave, which is like a lot of statues and there's like tunnels and there's like a stair leading upwards. But I kind of forgot to record, so that's a shame. But I did videotape like the rest of the area. After we're done with that, we did thought about climbing the rest of the mountain. Maybe there's like a really good view on the rest of China. But when we got up there, what we learned was that there was actually a Taoist temple up there. Completely by surprise. Just basically a Kung Fu master, right? So if you don't know what Taoism is, it's sort of a philosophy religion. If you ever heard like Michael Jordan say, I'm in a zone. If you ever heard a professional gamer say they want to enter the flow state. If you've ever heard like that one Bruce Lee quote that goes something like, be like water, or it's like a finger pointing at the moon. Don't focus too much on the finger or you're going to lose all that glorious view. So they're all essentially, describing the same thing, which is what Kung Fu masters call the Tao. There's like a Western philosopher about it online you can Google it on, you search it up on YouTube, Alan Watts. There's also like a music video, which is like kind of trippy. It's called Overthinker. I listen to it, quite a bit when I have nothing else to do. But before I describe where I go to next after the Taoist temple place, when I was in San Francisco, my first Uber driver in the city was a Chinese guy. And we were talking about Hawaii because our biggest alumni in Hawaii actually isn't Barack Obama. It's actually China's first president. And the name is Zhongshan, right? So we were talking about Zhongshan and he said there's a mountain in China called Shaoshan. I was like, what the hell? Why did this guy bring up this name? Obviously these two words are really similar. They have the word Shan in it. So we went to Shaoshan, but I didn't realize I was in Shaoshan yet, right? I only realized this after. We went to Shaoshan and realized this is actually Mao Zedong's home place, right? We went to the place, we explored the area, and one thing I learned is that a lot of people would actually drop cigarette packs next to his memorial because it's sort of like passing a joint to the afterlife, which I thought was pretty funny. But what's pretty ironic is outside the place, there's a lot of like touristy areas. There's like a lot of souvenir shops, which I thought was pretty ironic considering this is like a revolutionary site. I was told that there was going to be a lot of Russians there. So I really wanted to practice my Slavic, right? But When I got there, it was already too late because the place was already closing, so I didn't meet any Russians. But I did see a lot of Russian signs. So, that does tell you something that wasn't like a complete lie. Now, after Shaoshan, we departed back to Pearl River Delta, which is in southern China. The Pearl River Delta is really interesting because when you think about the United States, we have our tech city in Silicon Valley, which is west coast. We have our finance capital, which is New York, on the east coast. And then there's Texas, right dab in the center, right? Las Vegas in a different state. But the thing about Pearl River Delta is that Guangzhou, which is where the Kung Fu masters are right there in Pearl River Delta. And then there is Macau, which is again right in Pearl River Delta. And then there is Hong Kong, which is known for, cinema, again, is right there in Pearl River Delta. And then of course there's Shenzhen, which is the Silicon Valley of China, which is again in Pearl River Delta, which is pretty insane to me because they're all within 2 hours drive from one another. But when we got to Shenzhen, I met up with my online video game friend. He's sort of like me in that he posts news about PUBG, but he sort of stopped a long time ago. I still do it, but I post a little bit more variety now on Twitter. But he posts on Weibo, which is like China's version of Twitter. What I did learn is that the third guy in our group, he actually started his own startup company in a different city, which basically operates making videos and making social media content for video games. So some of the games that he's actually worked for is Delta Force and also Marvel Rivals, which I thought was pretty insane, right? That's basically NetEase and Tencent right there. So a lot of these Chinese game companies are breaking into the global market right now. Along the line, when we were talking and we were walking around the area, we had like this spicy noodle with snails on top. Yeah, that's snails. He told me they were snails. I mean, they basically tasted like mushrooms. Like they're just chewy mushrooms. I didn't think too much about it, but it was good. It was alright. We also had milk tea. They didn't use a large straw because the idea is that you're not supposed to drink all of it in one go. The idea is that you're supposed to sip on it and savor the flavor, which I thought was actually really nice. And of course, my friend, he drove me around in his Tesla, and we thought about visiting the Tencent HQ because, of course, one of the reasons why I came to China and visiting Shenzhen was to look for game developers and also to talk with Tencent. Because one thing that happened was I just messaged Sean from Krafton. I was like, hey, can I come in? He said, okay. I was like, okay. I walked in. I thought maybe I could do the same thing with Tencent, but that didn't happen. And of course, my friend does have contact with Tencent, but he wasn't available at the time. So, unlucky. So after that, we did take some photos, and then we drove to Penguin Island, which is actually the nickname for an entire island that belongs to just Tencent. So they have an entire island to themselves just for developing games, which I thought was like insane, right? Like Tencent Island. The sound of that is crazy. But yeah, these guys invented WeChat. It was a pretty interesting time to visit them. Now after that, we visited a place which I really, really wanted to visit, which was basically 4 to 5 years ago. We heard of this legendary black market in China that basically you could go in and you could actually modify your phone with different components. So if you bring like an iPhone, they could actually turn it into a flip phone. If you wanted to extend your physical storage, they could do that. If you wanted to extend your physical battery, they could do that. Invent like a new phone, like right on the spot, like modify it and sort of like prototype it. You could do that. Create any kind of chimera monstrosity you want. But of course, this one place got government crackdown a really long time ago. So it's no longer really operates like that anymore. Obviously, I think if you do have the right contacts and you do find somebody that trusts you, you probably could find somebody that still does that stuff. But for the most part, they mainly do battery storage upgrades, which of course India also does. Nothing really crazy anymore. But we did went to this one place which was covered in scaffolding, and of course visited this electronic bazaar, and then we found a place that sold wireless chargers, and he actually bought me one, which I thought was really nice. Now after that, I did leave back to my hotel, and then the next day we departed to Hong Kong. Now before I go on, when I returned back to the States, I just realized how much WeChat actually does and just how much we actually need it in the West. For example, like I was on WeChat, and again, this is the only app I downloaded. We booked a hotel, a gaming hotel with PCs in the room in Shenzhen, on the app itself, on WeChat itself, and as we departed, I used a vending machine, again paying with just a QR code by scanning this little piece of paper. Then I used a map system inside WeChat to actually find the nearest restaurants. We went to this dim sum restaurant, this dumpling restaurant, and of course we called it Didi, which is basically like their version of Uber, again in the app itself, in WeChat itself. And by the time we get there, we use WeChat to pay, but we didn't just use WeChat to pay, we also used WeChat to scan a QR code to access a digital menu, and you just click certain pictures and they just come to you within like a minute with your food. It gets paid automatically on your phone when you actually leave. And then of course we use the map again to find Hong Kong, and then I messaged my friend again, still inside WeChat, the app, and then I went to the Hong Kong border. Then once I crossed the border and got to the other side, which is also really interesting because it's like visiting another American states. You sort of still have to go through customs and security. And then by the time we got into Hong Kong has a really interesting rail system. You don't have to buy a ticket. You don't have to buy a special card. All you need is your credit card or your debit card, and you just tap the machine and you can go through. Like, that easy. And of course, I did use Apple Pay on my phone to do the same thing. And of course, I did buy a new SIM card when I got into Hong Kong. I did visited Bruce Lee. I did see the Kowloon Mountains, because Kowloon actually translates to 9 dragons. And the reason for this is because there's 8 mountains surrounding Hong Kong, and the 9th dragon is China's emperor. So I thought that was really cool. We also saw this mosque. I think it's a mosque. But we also went through Kowloon Garden, Kowloon Park. I think that's the name. But yeah, there was like a lot of people. And of course, I did really have to get back to Shenzhen real quickly because the borders actually closed off at a certain time. And of course, when we got back, we used Hong Kong's train system. It was really like easy. Like, I don't think you can actually get lost on the system. The train just takes you around in a big circle surrounding the entire island, so that's really convenient. Now, by the time I got back to Shenzhen, I did remember reading somewhere that China sort of has a big 3. There's Mao, and then there's Xi Jinping, and there's Deng Xiaoping, which is the guy that introduced capitalism and free market to China. And of course, he was president when Ronald Reagan was president. And one of his experiments was noticing that Hong Kong was doing really successful, so he decided to build an experimental tech city right across the border, and basically made it so that any Chinese person could immigrate there. So essentially what happens is you have Hong Kong and you have the rest of Canton, who all speak Cantonese, but then you have this really small region in Shenzhen, which speaks predominantly Mandarin. I thought that was really interesting, like also just culturally, that this is essentially a melting pot, and everyone essentially just speaks their national language. But of course, knowing this little piece of history, I thought maybe there would be like a memorial of him around here. So I did like find him, and holy crap, like, they have an entire mountain dedicated to the guy. So you have to actually climb this 15 to 20 minute climb to get to the top of the mountain. And by the time I got there, it was already like 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. It had this really good view, and of course there's a big bronze statue of the guy. So I did find a gaming lawyer. I did meet up with my Tencent connection guy. I did catch up with that third friend who now, of course, does outsourcing work for NetEase, which is pretty impressive. I did get to visit Hong Kong, I did get to visit Shenzhen, and do a lot of stuff. Now, my Chinese friend did tell me I held my chopsticks better than he does. Before I left, we got some souvenirs. He did give me some presents. For example, we did buy a Huawei phone. We also bought a DJI drone. Because, of course, these 2 companies are, the top 2 companies that America, my government, wants dead, right? So what better products than to buy, these 2 things, which, of course, has really high value and really high rarity, because you can't really get them, right? It's really hard to get them in the United States, or at least for DJI, it's really hard to get them at a discounted value, but also with like their original machinery. Because DJI basically makes like 90% of the world's high-end drones, and then of course Huawei does like I think about 60% of like the world's like 5G systems. This is a pretty good souvenir to take home, and I think that was a pretty good conclusion to my trip in China. The biggest culture shock for me was probably the fact that when I was in China, I was looking around for a restaurant to use the bathroom. And then my friend thought I was weird because he just asked why didn't I just use the public bathroom. And I just realized, I've sort of been conditioned in the States to avoid public restrooms because usually it's very dirty, it's very nasty. And of course, sometimes the homeless even lives in them. So you're sort of discouraged to visit those areas. So I didn't realize that the public bathrooms in China, specifically in the cities, were really, really clean. Not so much in the rural areas, but again, this is the rural countryside. What did you expect? And being able to use Hong Kong's rail system was actually really interesting because we actually are building a rail system in Hawaii, specifically in the island of Oahu. But the project essentially got delayed by like 20-30 years. It's such a big disaster that it's essentially the most expensive rail project in the entire world. Just about 10 miles of distance or around 17 kilometers. So it's not like crazy long distance, but it is very costly. The project so far reached around $10 billion and is about to reach maybe possibly $13 billion. So it's not very ideal. But even then, they did release 1/3 of the project. 2/3 of it is going to release this year, October. But the card system is such a disaster because you have to buy a specific card, and even then you gotta load it up with money. But they make it such a big hassle to load it up with money that you might as well just copy Hong Kong system instead of trying to do all these special bonuses and niche little features. See you guys next time in maybe possibly Russia, but of course no guarantees because of current atmosphere. But yeah, see you guys next time.